And welcome. You're watching Middle East Now on i24 News. I'm Laura Stellier, and these are the headlines. Iran vows to respond to Israel's attack on its military sites and says the consequences will be bitter. The UN Security Council meeting tonight to discuss the attack after Iraq filed a complaint against Israel for using its airspace. And signs of progress in hostage negotiations in Doha, where Qatari, Egyptian and American proposals are being discussed. Iran has warned of bitter, unimaginable consequences for Israel following its airstrikes on Iranian military targets on Saturday night. The UN Security Council will meet tonight to discuss the strikes, which Israel says targeted drone and ballistic missile manufacturing and launch sites, as well as air defence batteries. More in this report from our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran.
The United Nations Security Council is convening on Monday to discuss Israel's attack on Iran over the weekend. Prior to the session, Iraq submitted to the UN an official complaint against Israel, condemning its, quote, flagrant violation of its sovereignty for using Iraqi airspace in the strike. Just 2 days ago, though, Baghdad struck a different tone, denying Israel had breached its airspace.
Iraq has distanced its airspace from open conflict, despite attempts to drag us into one. We stand in solidarity with the Islamic Republic of Iran and stand against this aggression. Therefore, it is unreasonable that the Iraqi airspace was used for this aggression.
Images on social media from Iraq even showed fragments of missiles used by Israel that fell in an area north of Baghdad. Adding to the absurdity, Iraqi Shiite militias claimed responsibility for launching an attack drone at northern Israel early Monday. الموت لأمريكا الموت لإسرائيل اللعنة على اليهود. Meanwhile, the scope of the damage dealt to Iran over the weekend continues to emerge. Minutes before the first wave of Israeli strikes, several Iranian air defense radars were hacked, enabling IDF planes to enter Iran's airspace unhindered. In addition to eliminating numerous air defense batteries and drone manufacturing sites, satellite images show damage to 2 secret bases used to mix solid fuel for ballistic missiles in Parchin and Khojir, near Tehran. After initially downplaying the severity of the Israeli strikes, the commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guards warned Israel of, quote, unimaginable consequences.
Our position is clear. We are using all available means to respond firmly and effectively to the aggression of the Zionist regime. Basically, the nature of our response will depend on the nature of the attack.
Iran now faces tough choices in its decision how to respond to Israel's strikes. As for Israel, it managed to expose vulnerabilities in Iran's air defenses, enabling it to easily step up future attacks on Iran if it chooses.
And Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu elaborating on those strikes when he opened the Knesset earlier. He says that Israel struck Iranian factories of death. To talk a bit more about that, I'm joined in the studio this hour by Yaki Dayan. He is the former Israeli consul in Los Angeles. Great to have you with us, Yaki.
Good evening, Laura.
So let's talk about the strike. I mean, the Iranians were downplaying it. They now say they will respond. And looking at Benjamin Netanyahu's comments earlier, he is saying quite clearly that it wasn't the White House that convinced him to scale down the attacks, because we were talking about something much bigger originally, weren't we?
Well, I would take it with a grain of salt, but I think it was a phenomenal strike and a phenomenal execution of the strike. But it was with very deep cooperation with the U.S. administration, I would say, because at the beginning, the scale and the scope that the Israelis thought about had been much larger than what was done at the end. But the Americans said, listen, we have elections on November 5th, and we want some kind of a contained strike, something that wouldn't lead to an overall war in the Middle East, a war that would jeopardize American soldiers. That's the biggest fear that the Americans had. And there was a very, I would say, a large scale of cooperation with the Americans on the intelligence, on the airspace, on many other aspects. So eventually, I think that because of the cooperation and no doubt the defense systems that the Americans provided to the Israelis, so it was contained. but I think that the execution and the message were extremely strong. So at the end of the day, that was a very good strike.
All right, Yaki, for now, thank you very much. While more details have emerged about just how that attack unfolded on Saturday night, the Independent Persian publishing an account today of what happened. And we're joined now by the paper's editor-in-chief, Camelia Entikhabifard. Wonderful to see you, Camelia. And you report today that the Iranian defense radar systems were hacked just a few minutes before the attack began, and that essentially disabled Iran's air defenses. How big a part did that play in allowing the attack to take place?
Thank you, dearest Laura, for hosting, and good evening to everyone. We had a couple of sources for this report sitting in Iran that have spoken with us, and they were elaborated. The attack happened when some of these defense systems, but I have to say that they were speaking about those S-300 defense system has been paralyzed. And then when they reached the headquarters, they had an order to use the different radar system, which it doesn't make them capable to use the S-300, and they went to another missile, the defense system, to confront the Israeli attack. Time is the best friend. It would tell us later if this report can be confirmed. But the places as Israelis were confirmed, and we saw that on the map. Mainly it sounds like the energy sectors and some of the military bases defense system has been attacked. It looked like Israeli wanted to show they can dismantle some of the air system defenses in order, if that would be the retaliation from the regime, then they can hit some other key areas if it needed, which I hope never ever happen, and the two countries make peace and the war never happened between both of them.
Okay, and Iran, meanwhile, has been trying to downplay the attack, hasn't it, to its own people. But just how much do the Iranian people know about what happened on Saturday night?
Many Iranians woke up hearing the defense system were alerting and shooting missiles. And since these places are not close to the civilian populated area, these damages couldn't be heard by them, and they were not near the big cities or the populated cities. Usually these places are outside of the town, and they haven't heard the explosion from the missile hitting the ground. But there is another aspect of this story. Iranians, since years, they want to make the regime changes, and regardless, they're thinking the consequences of these attacks, they were thinking the regime changes is next when such things is happening in Iran. And we heard that the Americans said clearly they are not after regime changes in Iran. This Biden administration said that. No one supporting any foreign attack against Iran. So this is a national sentiment. But at the same time, they were thinking Israeli have to defend itself against of the terrorism. And this terrorism can be any sort of the regional terror against of the Israelis. This back and forth between Iran and Israel divided our nation in Iran between two camps. Some people were supporting and some people were against. And when you are at this between, even reporting becomes so difficult because of the nationalism in one part, and the other side, people doesn't support the Islamic Republic. That is a wave, I can tell you, the Islamic Republic can relay on. And people who were thinking why the nation should be at this level, which Israeli can attack, they would accusing them to this conspiracy of acting against of the national security and espionages. And when people were saying the defense should be much stronger, at this point some other Iranian attacking them and thinking why Islamic Republic have to interfere in the regional situation and support terrors, which makes the country so vulnerable. So the situation is kind of very complicated in Iran.
Fascinating insight, as always. Camelia Entekabifad, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yaki Dayab with me in the studio. Yaki, do you think we're now entering into a period of long-term ping-pong between Iran and Israel when it comes to these strikes and counter-strikes? Or do you think Israel has a systematic strategy of peeling back Iran's defense so it can ultimately go for those nuclear sites?
That's the $1 million question, because I think the strike was extremely positive because it hit the air systems, the entire air systems, defense systems that the Iranians have, and also their missile factories. Now, if the Iranians respond, what the Americans told the Iranians, listen, if now you strike again a reaction to the Israelis, then we might not contain Israel. Israel might strike much harder than that. So there are even people in Israel that wish that the Iranians will strike back, because then the strike is going to be much harsher. And much harsher includes two sections that till now we didn't touch them. One is the energy sector, and the other one is the nuclear sector. So those two sectors are extremely vulnerable now, because the Iranians don't have the air defense system, and if the Iranians hit back, then the next Israeli strike might hit that, and the Iranians should take that into consideration.
They're much more vulnerable now. Yaki,
absolutely.
Thank you. Well, Iran is taking its case to the UN Security Council, a case which is backed up by Iraq, which has formally complained about Israel using its airspace during Saturday's strikes. Iraq also says the United States was complicit in the attack. Iranian-backed militia in Iraq have been attacking Israel directly since October 7th, and the UN Security Council will meet tonight to discuss the situation. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Entifad Kambar. He's the president and founder of the Kurdish Protection Action Committee and the former spokesman for the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq. Good to have you with us, Entifad. So the initial complaint came not from the Iraqi government in Baghdad, but from Kataib Hezbollah. This is the Iranian-backed militia in Iraq. Does the Iraqi government then share the position of this terrorist group?
Well, good to see you, Laura. Hello from Michigan with the Trump's campaign. What's happening now, Laura, is Kataib Hezbollah, although the Prime Minister of Iraq speaks from one side of his mouth, said Iraq should have 70, there should be no terrorism from Iraq. And the other side of his mouth, he talks to them and they are part of his government. And this is not a rumor when I tell you, it's a reality. It's imprinted and published and approved by the Iraqi parliament that those militias, including Kataib Hezbollah, Asaib al-Haq, al-Nujaba, which are bombarding Israel almost on daily basis now, are on the government payroll. And the chief of staff of the PMF, General Abu Fadak, he is also, he said on TV, on the record, that he's waiting for orders from Khamenei. He's also on the Iraqi payroll using Iraqi IDs. Iraqi government IDs, have access to the highest security quarters in the Iraqi government. At the same time, the Iraqi government punishing the Kurds, which are the allies of the United States. So what we have now, awarding the enemies of Israel and the United States, punishing the friends and allies of the United States, the Kurds. But the biggest problem, even bigger, the United States is approving and endorsing this policy and are accepting it, which is outrageous.
And how would Donald Trump's policy be different on Iraq?
I think Donald Trump has what I'd like to call it, a moral clarity. The friends of the United States will be naturally awarded. It's a common sense versus lunacy, I call it. The lunacy of awarding Iranian proxies and awarding Iran by the current administration versus the common sense. Those are the enemies of the United States. The Iranians are hacking the United States, are spying on the United States, trying to commit terrorism on United States soil. All the intelligence community said that there are serious attempts to kill President Trump on American soil. So the common sense, it doesn't need more. A 9-year-old child will understand you have to stand against Iran. However, the current administration awarding Iran, allowing Iran to make money over $100 billion. And tell me, I just want to tell you, The 7th of October was a natural result of this allowing Iran to fund. The current administration, believe it or not, removed sanctions on the Houthis on February 5th, 2022. And now the Houthis are controlling the seas and cutting all the ship movements. So what we have now.
That's true. Sorry to interrupt. That's true, Entifad. But former President Trump has said he wants to end foreign wars. Are you not concerned that he will move troops out of Iraq more quickly?
Actually, he is more of a peace with strength. He will use a surgical military operations to kill terrorists, to eliminate those who are bad actors, as the way he killed Qasem Soleimani, the most notorious terrorist in the history of mankind, and Abu Mahdi with him. And I don't think he will hesitate to do it on. I spoke to his campaign quite a bit and on details with Mr. Richard Grenell, with Senator Graham. I saw him last week on the campaign. And they all saying, we are not for open wars. We're not for sending big armies and create wars, but we are at the same time in favor of peace with strength, and we're going to enforce peace. Peace is not a romantic word you can enforce. Peace has to be enforced by a powerful American policy, foreign policy, American national security, and also sometimes surgical military operations.
Well, enjoy Michigan, Entifad. Great to talk to you as always. Entifad Kambar there. Thank you.
Thank you.
While Israel continues to strike Hezbollah targets inside Lebanon, meanwhile, air raid sirens have been blaring across Israel's northern communities today, including in the city of Haifa. Our Zach Andrews is up there for us now. Zach, what's happening?
Well, probably what is going to be played quite a bit is going to be these strikes in Tyre. These are impressive and massive in scale. It follows an IDF Arabic spokesperson's call to evacuate this area of the city in Tyre. This is a very old city. It's got a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But here the IDF says that Hezbollah and its Aziz unit, which is commands the southwestern portion along the coast of Hezbollah's forces, the IDF saying that inside Tyre they were producing weapons and that had different facilities for this Aziz unit that they were targeting. We don't have a clear picture of casualties right now in these Tyre strikes, which potentially indicates that that call to evacuate was successful. Noted that there was several Arabic-speaking television networks that were had fixed live camera positions around this evacuation zone. So it does appear that a lot of people heard to get out of this area. But the strikes were within 2 hours of the initial call to evacuate. But just based on the number of cameras that we saw filming some of the strikes live, it does appear that a lot of people did get out of there before these strikes began. We've also been tracking strikes in the Baalbek Valley once again, the Bekaa Valley near Baalbek. What we're seeing there is earlier calls on Hezbollah-affiliated Telegram channels to send ambulances. Large number of casualties reported, but again, we're at this stage in the conflict now where Hezbollah is not reporting any of the losses on their end. They have, at this point in the day, claimed responsibility for 12 attacks in northern Israel. What we're seeing here, the IDF telling me before 4 p.m., 115 different projectiles launched from Lebanon into northern Israel. No reports of casualties, no significant damage. However, fires started throughout the Galilee and in the Golan.
Zach, thank you very much for that update. Zach Andrews there up in the north of Israel. Yaki Dayan is with me in the studio. And Yaki, we've kind of taken our eyes off Lebanon slightly, given the situation with Iran. But the IDF has suffered some pretty heavy losses in Lebanon in recent days. Are you worried about Israel getting bogged down there?
No, listen, they're doing their job, and it's a war, so there is a heavy price, but it's directly connected to Iran. I mean, the Iranians are running the operation right now in Lebanon, and what's going on in Lebanon on the strategic level is that the U.S. envoy, Hochstein, is coming tomorrow, and basically what is discussed is some kind of a package deal between Lebanon and Israel, in which the Americans will impose a weapon embargo on the Hezbollah, in order that the Hezbollah will not be able to regroup, and Israel will have the right to strike if it's being violated. So those are the elements that are being put, and in return, Israel will not expand the ground operation, meaning they will stop in the near villages, and they will not go all the way to the Litani. This is what's being discussed right now, and if this doesn't work, so Israel has to expand and go all the way in the ground operation till the Litani. But I think that relatively, we were afraid that we would pay a much heavier price than what Israel is paying now, although it's a difficult and terrible price, but it's lower than what was estimated when before the war started in Lebanon.
Yaki, for now, thank you. Well, let's take a look at the reaction of some of the Arab states to Israel's attack on Iran. Saudi Arabia condemned it, calling it a violation of Iran's sovereignty and of international law. To talk more about that, we're joined by Lawai Al-Sharif, peace activist and expert in Arab-Israeli relations. Great to have you with us, Lawai. And, I mean, Israel would have hoped that the Saudis would take their side in the war with the Islamic Republic, but actually Riyadh was one of the first countries to condemn it. Why is that?
Well, Laura, my personal opinion, Saudi Arabia's response reflects a principled approach rather than a choice of sides. It's very important to know that I know that many people know, but there are no diplomatic ties with Israel or between Saudi Arabia and Israel at the time being. By condemning any violation of sovereignty, Riyadh aligns itself with the framework of peace, encouraging restraints and promoting diplomatic pathways over military escalation. It's less about, Laura, supporting one nation over another, and more about emphasizing the need for all regional actors to respect each other's sovereignty and security. I believe if Saudi Arabia and Israel were having peace agreement, that statement would look different.
Well, the Israelis are a little worried because this comes just a few days after an actual joint military drill between Saudi Arabia and Iran in the Gulf of Oman, a naval drill. Has Saudi Arabia decided that the Islamic Republic is here to stay and they better learn to get along with them?
Well, that drill really signals something, but not the thing that many people think. The recent joint drill, in my opinion, Laura, signals Saudi Arabia's pragmatic approach in acknowledging the presence of Iran as an influential regional power, rather than endorsing Iran's policies. It's totally different from endorsing the policy. Saudi Arabia seeks to foster open channels to address shared challenges, such as the maritime security. But this cooperation, in my opinion, illustrates a cautious but constructive engagement, recognizing the regional stability is often achieved through balanced relations rather than isolation or confrontation. But it's not in any way an endorsement of Iran's policies, I would say.
What about the U.S. election, Lawai, now less than a week away? How does that affect the calculus in Riyadh?
Well, let me tell you just a general rule of thumb, Laura. In the Gulf or in many Arab states, usually the wave tides more into the Republicans, but that's my personal assessment. Saudi Arabia, in my personal assessment, like many nations, will carefully assess the outcome of the U.S. elections and any shifts in foreign policy. Regardless of the election results, Riyadh's focus will likely remain on maintaining stability in the region. Saudi Arabia's approach to Israel, this is very important, is more, I would say, reflective of its long-term vision for regional peace and cooperation rather than short-term politics shifts. I believe that if the White House, if the next president in the White House is determined about expanding the Abraham Accords and making it great again, inshallah, then we will see a very promising peace agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and this will absolutely make a great change in the geopolitics in the Middle East. I'm very optimistic, by the way, Laura.
Yeah, you're going to call it? You're going to call it for us, Lawai?
Of course, inshallah.
Inshallah, indeed. Great to talk to you, Lawai, as always. We appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Noaya Sharif, they're over in Abu Dhabi. Your reaction?
Apparently, Laura, Israel is not alone by supporting Trump and wanting Trump to be the next president for the Middle East. But I think that
Not all Israelis.
Not all Israelis. I would say not all Israelis. But if you speak about the Israeli government, at least, or the prime minister, I would say that there is a consensus here. And you know, two things struck me. One is the fear that the Saudi Arabia is now. The big fear from the Iranians that the Saudis have right now, because they don't have a defense treaty between them and the Americans. And I think that not only normalization with Israel, but this defense treaty would change not only the region, but the cooperation between Saudi Arabia and Iran, because they still remember that in 2019, when the Iranians struck half of the energy sector in Saudi Arabia.
They knocked off 5% of global oil supply.
Exactly. Donald Trump, that was the president back then, didn't do anything. And I think that they want assurances that they have defense system and defense treaty with the Americans before they disengage from the Iranians.
And you think this normalization accord is more likely under President Trump?
I think it would gain momentum after with the next president, but you know, the Saudis are very adamant in requesting that that would be a path for a two-state solution. So as long as you don't include that, and currently the Israelis after the October 7th look at any concept of a two-state solution as a price for terrorism. So this is a big hurdle on the way to normalization, I would say.
Keith, thank you very much. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, the Mossad chief David Barnea has returned to Israel from Qatar after negotiating the latest proposals for a deal to free the 101 hostages still being held in Gaza. We'll get the very latest for you next. Stay with us.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Welcome back. The Mossad chief, David Barnea, is back in Israel from Doha, where he's been part of negotiations to free the remaining 101 hostages who are still being held in Gaza. Egyptian, Qatari and American proposals are being discussed. Our Jody Notilovitz has the detail.
As efforts are being made to try and end the more than a year-long war between Israel and Hamas, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has proposed a new hostage and ceasefire deal. This as Israel's Mossad intelligence chief, David Barnea, and CIA Director Bill Burns headed to Qatar to resume talks about moving a hostage release deal forward.
In Egypt, during the past few days, efforts have been made to move the situation towards a 2-day ceasefire, during which 4 hostages would be exchanged for some prisoners held in Israeli jails. Then, over the next 10 days, negotiations would proceed to complete measures in the area or to reach a full ceasefire and allow aid to enter.
Earlier this month, Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar was killed by IDF troops in a move that was described as an opportunity to make progress on a deal that would see the release of some or all the hostages. While Qatar is host to several top Hamas leaders, the terror group will not be involved in this round of meetings, as Israel explores the potential for a preliminary agreement aimed at understanding Hamas decision-making following Sinwar's death, though the potential for joining subsequent negotiations about a larger deal remains open. According to sources, Hamas may be willing to accept the Egyptian proposal as long as it is incorporated into its July 2nd demands, offering a detailed agreement to negotiators for the immediate cessation of the conflict, the evacuation of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip, and the exchange of a number of Palestinian prisoners for the immediate release of all Israeli captives. Speaking at a memorial on Sunday for IDF troops killed on October 7th, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant admitted that not all of Israel's objectives can be achieved through military operations alone.
Power is not the essence of everything. To realize our moral and ethical duty to bring our hostages home, we will have to make painful concessions.
In the same breath, Israel has stated that until Hamas is eliminated as a military force and political body in Gaza, the conflict will not be over.
Well, we can get more now on the hostage negotiations. Our Emmanuel Honora is down at the IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv. Emmanuel, so David Barnea is back from Qatar. Any idea of where we are with those negotiations so far?
Right, and Bill Burns, the CIA chief, has also returned from those talks, and that really, Laura, just concludes the Israeli and the U.S. side of these negotiations that just started yesterday and lasted at about 24 hours. Now, according to a statement from the Prime Minister's office, we now know that it's Hamas's turn to sit with the Qatari and Egyptian delegations and discuss all the options that are being proposed. Now, according to the same statement, a new unified proposal that combines previous proposals and also takes into account the main issues and recent developments in the region. Now, that was the main proposal that was being discussed over the last 24 hours. And of course, major recent development in the region is, of course, the killing of Hamas chief Yahya Sinwar in Gaza. And it will just really be interesting to see how the assassination of Sinwar might actually affect these negotiations, if it might actually change any kind of demand, any way of negotiating. Now, as you can see behind me, there's still small protests today, not necessarily planned, but these protests have been going on now for the last year, and obviously small amount, 100 or so people calling for a deal for the release of the 101 hostages. So far, maybe there's a glimmer of hope, but still too early to know.
Emmanuel, thank you very much. Emmanuel Honora there down in Tel Aviv. Yaki Dayan is with me in the studio. He's the former Israeli consul in Los Angeles. So, Yaki, is it too soon to hope for a breakthrough this time? And how does the death of Sinwar alter the situation?
So actually, the death of Sinwar can bring a change only if the Americans would use their leverages on the Qataris, because the Qataris are not an honest broker. I mean, they are supporting Hamas, and the entire leadership of the Hamas now is located in Doha, in Qatar. It's not like before that Yahya Sinwar was running the entire show from Gaza. Now, the main focus of the Hamas leadership is in Doha. So if the Qataris would use their leverages, obviously they don't want him to use the leverages, but if they had used the leverages, we would have seen a change in the dynamic of the negotiations. Now, the question is if the Americans are willing to pressure, to push, to use all the leverages on the Qataris in order to make some kind of a change. But definitely, the death of Sinwar can lead to a change. It depends very much on the Americans and how the Americans are going to conduct the negotiations right now.
And I guess we'll find out in the coming days. For now, Yaki, thank you. Well, to talk in a bit more detail about the Egyptian proposal that's on the table, we're joined by Miret F. Mabrouk. She's a senior fellow and the founding director of the Egypt and Horn of Africa programme at the Middle East Institute. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. There have been some reports that Hamas is open to the Egyptian proposal. Do you have any more information on that?
I don't actually have any more information on that. First of all, thank you so much for having me on. I don't actually have any more information on that. I would not be surprised if they were open. They are in a greatly weakened state, but I think any acceptance on their part is going to include some form of hostage swap and some form of withdrawal from Gaza. Now, considering the amount of damage that Israel has wreaked upon Hamas's infrastructure, considering that Yahya Sinwar has been killed, considering all of these factors, I mean, a withdrawal might be something that Israel might agree to. I've not the slightest idea, but I do think that Hamas, at the very, very least, is going to be sitting there and is going to be seriously considering anything on the table.
And from Cairo's perspective, how important is it for them to be the ones that manage to get a deal instead of Qatar? Because there does seem to be a certain rivalry there, just in terms of remaining a relevant player in the region.
Okay. I actually don't think that it's an either or, because I don't think the Egyptians would be able to pull it off on their own. I don't think the Qataris would be able to pull it off on their own. And really, nothing is going to happen without acceptance from both Hamas and, most importantly, the Israelis. There isn't really a rivalry between Egypt and Qatar in the sense that they both provide different contacts, a different set of networks. They've really been working together on this. And as for Egypt remaining relevant, I think it depends what issue in the Middle East you're talking about. Certainly in this issue, I don't see any way of cutting into Egypt's relevance on the issue. There will be no negotiation that does not have, no truce that does not have Egypt front and center. So I don't think that is the question. I think the question is how to put something practical on the table that will be accepted by Hamas, but also increasingly, because we've mentioned quite rightly that the death of Yahya Sinwar might open up avenues to possibly a truce. But then on the other hand, my understanding from Israeli politics is that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has also been fairly reluctant to accept any truce. And therefore, we have to realize that despite the best, despite the best considerations of both the Egyptians and the Qataris and the Americans, it really is going to be something that for Hamas and Israel to step up on.
And Qatar differs from Egypt, of course, doesn't it, in that Gaza is right on Egypt's doorstep. Egypt used to, in fact, control Gaza. Does it have a strategy when it comes to the reconstruction of Gaza and what it would like Gaza to look like and who would control Gaza in the future?
So Egypt used to administer Gaza rather than control Gaza. They're two very, very different things. And again, I think we're looking at it slightly backwards. Any viable strategy for Gaza is going to have to be something that Israel comes up with in coordination with whatever Palestinian entity is going to be in charge. It's not going to be Hamas, obviously. But also Israel has said that it won't accept a PLO entity either, which makes life difficult. In Egypt's case, as is the case with, I think, most Arab countries, Egypt would be interested and would be delighted to help with reconstruction, with administration, with any help there is. It will not, I think, and this is important, to be part of any multinational force, and neither will any other Arab country if there is no viable, at least, track towards a Palestinian state, because it won't want to be seen as complicit in an Israeli occupation. But you are absolutely correct in thinking that the welfare and the security of Gaza is extremely important to the Egyptians, because it's been a conflict raging on their borders, and they already have 2 other conflicts raging on 2 other borders. So the swifter a path to some sort of secure stability, the better it would be for the Egyptians.
All right.
Not to mention, of course, the Palestinians and the Israelis.
Thank you very much, Miret Mabrouk. We appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yaki Dayan is with me in the studio. Your reaction to what you just heard, how do you foresee a role for Egypt
So
in all of this?
one point, Laura, is that Egypt can be part of the any future agreement on Gaza. Israel should make sure that Qatar isn't. I mean, we remember the envelopes and the money and the cash that were flown to Gaza by the Qataris. Israel should insist that Qatar might be a mediator now, but shouldn't be part of any future agreement. Egypt has to be part of any future agreement because, as you said correctly, Egypt has a border with Gaza, so definitely they should be a significant player over there.
And they will be affected by what happens in Gaza, because even though they've been taking steps to really fortify the border with Rafah, they will be affected by what goes on in Gaza.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's the reason that Gaza was so much full with weaponry was because the passage between Egypt and Gaza, Rafah, was completely open. So that has to be taken into consideration. That has to be, something has to be done over there, and we cannot depend totally and solely as before on the Egyptians, because we saw what was the outcome of that.
What about what Miret was saying about there seems to be a perception in the Arab world that Israel has been holding up a hostage deal, that Israel is reluctant to agree to some kind of hostage deal, when the fact is that Hamas has rejected all of the deals. I mean, how do you explain that?
So the Hamas is demanding a few things which Israel couldn't accept. One was a complete withdrawal of the Israeli army, a complete cessation of this war, and definitely they are requesting a number of terrorists to be released from Israeli jails that has blood on their hands, but significant ones, and those are sticking points on any solution. But one of the I think understandings after October 7th is that Israel cannot leave definitely in the south, but also in the north, without having some kind of a buffer zone. So even if Israel pulls out and there is some kind of a solution with an international force and all of that, still Israel will have to maintain some kind of a buffer zone in order not to have the October 7th repeating itself, as the Hamas declared that they want to do it again and again and again.
And just finally, do you think Hamas has been degraded enough that it can never retake power in Gaza? And is Prime Minister Netanyahu wrong to rule out the Palestinian Authority governing Gaza?
So on the military side, yes, for a long run. On the administrative side, no. I mean, still Hamas is controlling Gaza, and still significant changes have to be done over there in order to make sure that the Hamas doesn't control the administration. And that means, having said that, you have to have some kind of an alternative force coming into Gaza and controlling the administration, and still such a force hasn't been found. So as long as you don't have some kind of a force controlling the administrative side, still there is no solution to the war in Gaza.
All right, Yaki Dayan, we appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, to other news now, and 10 Iranian police officers were killed in an attack on a convoy in the restive province of Balochistan today. The Baloch ethnic group live in Iran, Afghanistan and Pakistan, and all three countries have been dealing with a low-level insurgency for years. Iran and Pakistan each carried out strikes on each other's countries' Baloch regions earlier this year. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Ahmed Qureshi. He is a journalist and TV host based in Pakistan. Good to see you, Ahmed. Great to have you with us again. Is this recent attack on these Iranian police officers by Baloch separatists linked to the escalating tensions in the region? And where does Pakistan stand on this?
Yeah, it's good to be with you, Laura. So this is a very, very interesting story, and it just kind of was lost in the aftermath of the Israeli strike on Iran. And I can imagine right now in Tehran, the authorities would be very, very paranoid that this attack might have something to do, although it doesn't, but it might have something to do with the Israeli strike. And this is exactly the kind of thing they fear, that, this time the Israeli strike was like 4 hours, but if that kind of conflict extends and is bigger, like, sometime in the future, this could encourage local separatists to, get it into action and start attacking Iranian authorities. So we don't know much really about who did this right now, and which I can imagine would add to the paranoia of the authorities in Tehran, because no group or no militant group has really claimed responsibility. Usually this doesn't happen. Usually the groups that are active in the Iranian Baluchistan usually claim responsibility, and they're very proud of what they do. But at this time, probably it's calculated, probably they would like to add to the confusion of the Iranian authorities, but nobody has claimed so far. But this is a big deal. 10 policemen to be killed in a single attack, it's a big thing. I was scanning the Iranian media, and I did not, usually this incident in this region, Baluchistan, adjoining Pakistan, would usually get a lot of coverage in the Iranian media. This time didn't, because of the aftermath of the Israeli strike. But it's not good to have the IRGC, which is the Revolutionary Guards who are involved all over the region. It's not good to have them paranoid, because as you referred in your introduction, the last time they were paranoid, they actually fired missiles into Pakistan and also Iraq and Syria, claiming to have hit Mossad outposts. And then they stepped back from that story when Pakistan actually, unlike Syria and Iraq, Pakistan took offense to that and responded, obviously, by firing missiles inside Iran. So, but this gives you an idea that having the IRGC paranoid, like there would be, I can imagine. They're not speaking, they're not saying anything. I haven't heard any statement except for saying, Iranian authorities saying we're investigating. But I can imagine this would be of extreme concern to them for this to happen just a few hours after Israel finishes its work.
Absolutely. And so for Pakistan, what is their relationship like with Iran, 10 months after that very perilous time when the two countries did come to blows over Balochistan? Where does Pakistan on the situation right now?
So despite tensions, and there are tensions often on and off, the political communications between the two governments and the two militaries, they have excellent communication channels. And they should be, obviously, because they're always on standby, and there could be, anything, any incident of the kind that happened earlier this year with Iranian missiles being fired into Pakistan and Pakistan responding. So to avert this kind of a situation, I can imagine that the authorities in both countries are always on a standby on their border, but at the same time, they have excellent communication links, because they need to resolve conflicts immediately before they escalate. So they have those communications, they maintain good communications, they talk to each other, but at the same time, we have this tense situation in that region, and the blows, they came to blows early this year. It's tense. And I can imagine the Pakistani authorities would be very, very careful now. They understand that for the IRGC and for Iran to be tense like they are right now after the Israeli strike, and with this incident happening very close to the Pakistani border, I can imagine Pakistan and Pakistani authorities would be very, very carefully monitoring the situation on the Iranian border. Yeah, unless we forget Pakistan is a nuclear-armed state, so we don't want any escalating tensions there. Great to talk to you, as always, Ahmed Qureshi. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Well, Israel's strike on Iran was also a blow to Russia's Vladimir Putin. Moscow supplies Iran with the S-300 missiles that were destroyed on Saturday. Meanwhile, in better news for Putin, a pro-Moscow political party has just won elections in Georgia. The pro-Western opposition has made allegations of vote rigging. To talk more about all of this, we're joined by Anna Boshkovskaya. She's a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Great to have you with us, Anna. So let's start with the missiles, or the missile defense. It's the S-300. This is one of Russia's biggest arms exports. How damaging are these strikes by Israel to Russia's reputation?
Thanks for having me. It's always great to be on your show. I think we need to look at the bigger picture when it comes to the S-300. It is an important part of Russia's military-industrial complex. It's considered one of the crown jewels of Russia's military exports, but it is also not the top-of-the-line weaponry. Russia has the S-400 and actually has been developing the S-500. Certainly in Ukraine, where Russia has directed most of S-300, these air defense systems have not shown themselves to be a failure. There is a lot we still don't know in terms of the details of the Israeli strike. And here the devil, I would say, would be precisely in the details. If these S-300s have proven themselves to be a failure in Iran, it would be a blow to Russia's prestige for sure. But there's still a lot we don't know about what happened, what was struck and how. So I would be a little bit cautious in terms of jumping to conclusions, but it is, to be sure, an important development.
And the relationship between Iran and Russia has developed over the years. Iran supplies Russia with drones for its war in Ukraine, and the Russians supply Iran with missile defense. How quickly, if it does indeed need to, would Russia be able to replenish Iran's stocks of missiles?
I think at this stage, it's again, I think it's too soon to tell that there's going to be a major change. There doesn't seem to be any reason why Russia would necessarily be unable to do this, other than perhaps a political reason. So I would be, again, cautious about jumping to conclusions. But also think of it this way: yes, the S-300s are important. But they're only one part of what Russia brings to the table in terms of military capabilities. So when it comes to other types of weaponry like artillery, Kalashnikovs, this is Russia's more traditional military advantage, if you will. Here, again, Russia has not been proven to be a failure. What is important, however, and actually, if I may look at your question from another perspective, it is important to think about what Russia could or could not provide to Iran. But really the question is, if the S-300s are proven to be a failure, what does that mean for Russia's relationship with Israel going forward? Because one major issue for Israel is Russia's S-400 umbrella in Syria. In other words, Israel has relied for years on Russia's goodwill to be able to carry out its airstrikes in Syria. If these air defense systems are not as potent as they seem to be, this begs the question of, could Israel potentially do more on Ukraine? And that is certainly something important to discuss going forward.
Fascinating. Well, let's turn our attentions then from Russia in the Middle East to the Caucasus, and a country that is on Russia's doorstep, and a country that Vladimir Putin would like to draw closer into Russia's orbit. This is Georgia. We've got some live pictures coming to us from the capital, Tbilisi, I believe. There are large protests underway following election results. The pro-Western opposition says the election has been stolen by a pro-Moscow party. What are your thoughts on what's happening there?
Well, Russia has been doing a lot to exert political influence in Georgia for years. And while OSCE, in particular, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, has noted some irregularities about this election, they have stopped short of calling it completely rigged. However, that's only the immediate outcome of the vote. Russia has done a lot on other fronts, including through disinformation, through influence of oligarchs, through a whole host of other ways of infiltrating Georgia, in an attempt to shift this country's perspective. And that, I think, is important, because if we look at the entire South Caucasus region, Russia's influence in Armenia and Azerbaijan appears to have been waning militarily. But to make up for that, Russia has been gaining more politically in Georgia. Georgia has been essentially the poster child for post-Soviet integration. Together with Ukraine, these two countries are the top two countries that have most fiercely resisted Russia's influence. And the fact that Russia continues to gain influence in this country while also fighting the war in Ukraine is also significant in terms of what Russia is trying to do in the post-Soviet space.
Well, we're running out of time, but just briefly, without wanting to sound alarmist, could we possibly be looking at another Ukraine when it comes to Georgia?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily rule it out. I don't want to be alarmist either. Russia certainly can't afford to fight a major war, but the question here really is, without a full-on invasion, there's so much Russia can do short of a military intervention to exert influence in Georgia, and that is something we should be worried about.
Well, we appreciate it, Anna. Thank you very much indeed for giving us your insight into that. Anna Bushkovskaya, thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's programme. Do stay with us here on i24 News. Benita Levin is up next with the rundown. That's next.